Now another woman lay in a bed she never should have ended up in. Because of him. Grace woke to the soft hum of machines and the sterile scent of antiseptic. For a moment, she wasn't sure where she was, until the sharp ache in her joints and the weight in her chest reminded her. She turned her head slowly, eyes adjusting to the dim hospital light. Snow flurried outside the window in slow spirals. The world, impossibly, had continued. Her fingers curled instinctively over the side of the bed. And there it was. The hospital bill. Flattened now, smoothed with care. Next to it, her crumpled wad of bills, still intact. And beside them, a sleek white business card with a handwritten message on the back. "You should never have had to fight this alone. I see you now. Let me help." She read it twice. Then again. The signature was unmistakable. Ethan Caldwell. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was anger. Grace closed her eyes and let her mind drift back 3 weeks to the moment everything unraveled. That morning she had raced against time, finishing her overnight cleaning shift at a warehouse on the south side, then sprinting in the snow to the Blue Line, only to find the train delayed by a mechanical failure. She had run from the station to the Caldwell estate. Her shoes were soaked. Her coat wasn't thick enough for December. Her fingers were raw and bleeding from scrubbing industrial grout. And when she finally arrived, 5 minutes late, Ethan hadn't even looked at her. He didn't ask. He didn't care. "You're fired," he said, as casually as ordering an espresso. Grace had not begged. She had simply turned around, climbed the stairs, and packed the 2 shirts and 1 photo frame she kept hidden in the laundry closet. She hadn't cried then, not even when the agency stopped returning her calls, not even when she slept the first night in the hallway of a 24-hour laundromat. But now, staring at that white card, the tears came quietly, stubbornly, against her will. An hour later, a nurse brought in a tray of oatmeal and tea. "You're lucky," she said with a gentle smile. "They found you just in time." Grace gave a faint nod. Her voice hadn't returned. "There's someone in the waiting area who's been checking on you every hour. Tall guy, expensive coat." The nurse grinned. "You know him?" Grace didn't answer. But she knew. Ethan. Meanwhile, across the street, Ethan sat in the hospital cafeteria, clutching a lukewarm coffee like it might keep his guilt from freezing over again. He hadn't meant to stay this long. Originally, he'd told himself he would just call 911 and pay the bill, maybe arrange a hotel for a week. But something deeper, something he didn't understand, had taken root. He saw his mother again, not Grace, his mother. 25 years ago in a different hospital, working double shifts as a trauma nurse in East Garfield Park. Coming home coughing in the winter air, refusing to turn the heat up because they couldn't afford the bill. She'd collapsed in the hallway on Christmas Eve and never got back up. He'd buried her, then buried the memory. Now it returned with brutal clarity. He hadn't asked if she was tired. He hadn't asked if she was okay. Just like he hadn't asked Grace. Later that afternoon, Grace heard a soft knock. "Come in," she croaked, surprised at the sound of her own voice. Ethan stepped in, holding 2 cups of tea. "I wasn't sure how you'd take it," he said quietly, offering one to her. She hesitated, then took it. He didn't sit down, just stood there, hands folded, eyes tired. "I stopped by earlier," he said. "You were asleep." She nodded, not meeting his gaze. I handled the hospital bill, he added. Entirely. Her shoulders stiffened. Why? Because I should have asked why you were late that morning, and I didn't. She stared down at her hands. I don't want charity. It's not charity, he said. It's acknowledgement of your dignity, of the fight you were in. I failed to see it. Silence. Then softly, I had nowhere to go. I know, he replied. I found your old blanket in the laundry closet. Her eyes closed. Her shame burned like fever. You didn't ask, she said. I didn't. Another silence. This one hung heavy. Finally, she spoke. My mother's name is Dolores. She has stage 3 kidney failure. Medicaid covers part of it, but there's a dialysis fee and medications. I was working nights at the warehouse and days at your house. I thought, if I could make it through one more winter. Her voice broke. Ethan sat down slowly. I remember someone else, he said, eyes distant. My mother. She worked herself to the edge. I didn't realize until it was too late. Grace looked at him now, really looked, not at the CEO, not at the suit, at the son of a woman who hadn't been seen either. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. This, he said, placing it on the tray table, is an offer. She frowned. I want you to come back, not as staff, as Director of People First. We don't have that title yet, but we need it. Grace blinked. What would that even mean? Someone who notices what I didn't. Someone who listens. Someone who can make sure no one else sleeps in a laundry room ever again. She said nothing. Take your time, he said, rising. You don't have to say yes, but you're not going back to the streets. That part's not negotiable. He turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he paused. My mother loved morning light, he said. She used to say it made the day feel possible. That's why the sunroom is yours now. No expectations, just light. And then he was gone. That night, Grace didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, at the folder, at her mother's photo on the windowsill, and she whispered softly to no one, I'm tired of being invisible. The sunroom hadn't changed. It still faced east, framed by tall bay windows that caught the first light of morning like open palms. The room had always been silent, underused, decorative rather than lived in. But today, it breathed again. A fire murmured quietly in the hearth. The faint scent of lavender hung in the air, not from expensive candles, but from a dried bouquet in a ceramic vase by the window. Grace stood just inside the threshold, unsure whether to step forward. A real bed sat in the corner, not a cot, not a guest mattress hastily dressed. This was a real bed. Heavy wooden frame, hand-stitched quilt, a soft gray throw folded neatly at the foot. There was even a side table with a small reading lamp and a coaster already laid down, as if expecting her cup of tea. She didn't know what startled her more, the generosity of the gesture, or its intentionality. This wasn't pity. This was thought. She took one step inside, and the floor didn't creak. For 2 years she had walked on tiptoes across these polished hardwood floors. She had cleaned them every morning, waxed them every other Friday, memorized every ridge, every reflection of sunlight across the grain. But she had never stood on them like this, flat-footed, with permission. She exhaled. It made a sound, and the house didn't flinch. Later that evening, Ethan knocked once before entering. He was dressed simply, dark sweater, rolled sleeves, not a tie in sight. He held 2 mugs of tea. "Chamomile," he said. "I thought maybe you'd like something warm." Grace accepted the cup silently. The warmth seeped into her fingers. He looked around the room as if seeing it through her eyes for the first time. "This was my mother's favorite room," he said softly. "She used to say the morning light made even hard days feel lighter." Grace nodded once. "It's peaceful." He hesitated. "I hope it feels like yours." She didn't answer. Ethan took a small step back toward the door. "I'll let you rest. Just, if you need anything." "Why are you really doing this?" she interrupted, her voice low but steady. He paused. "Because I saw you. On that bench. And I remembered someone I failed to see before it was too late." Grace didn't speak, but her grip on the cup tightened. He nodded, almost to himself, then turned and left. That night, Grace didn't sleep. Not because the bed wasn't comfortable. It was. Far more comfortable than anything she had known in years. But her mind was a storm. She remembered the nights in the laundry closet, folding towels as quietly as possible after everyone had gone to bed, rolling out her blanket across the tile floor. She had never told anyone. She hadn't dared. If the agency found out she was sleeping on site, they'd revoke her placement. If Charles, or rather Ethan, had discovered it, she assumed he would have had her arrested for trespassing. But now that same man had placed her in the sunroom, with firelight, lavender, and a quilt she hadn't sewn for herself. What changed? Was it guilt? Or something more dangerous? Hope? The next morning, light poured into the room like water through open hands. Grace woke before it reached her face. For a moment, she simply lay there, eyes wide open, breathing it in. No alarms, no cold, no warehouse clock in. Just silence and heat, and the slow return of sensation in her toes and fingers. She sat up slowly, looking around again as if confirming the room had not vanished overnight. The folder Ethan had left her in the hospital sat on the side table, still unopened. She stared at it for a long time, then got up. Downstairs, the house was still immaculate, still polished, still cold in the way that only wealth untouched by love could be. But there were small signs of change. A coat casually thrown over a dining chair. A newspaper, half read, folded instead of flattened. The fire in the front sitting room still burned, though no one was watching it. Grace found Ethan in the kitchen pouring coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "Good morning," he said, surprised. "You're up early." She tilted her head. "Habit." He nodded. "Hungry?" She shook her head. "Not yet." He offered her the second mug. This time she took it without hesitation. They sat in silence at the long marble island. It had always looked like a showroom piece to her. She'd wiped it hundreds of times. Now she was sitting at it, drinking coffee. With him. It was surreal. Ethan broke the silence. "I want to be clear about something." Grace looked up. "That folder." He gestured to the sunroom. "It's not a favor. It's not compensation. It's an offer. You don't owe me anything, not for the hospital, not for the room." "Then why me?" she asked, eyes narrowing. You could hire someone with credentials, a consultant, a HR executive. I could, he agreed. But none of them have slept under the same roof they cleaned. None of them have seen this place the way you have. You know the corners people pretend don't exist. You know the names no one remembers. You saw us clearly and still came back. Grace looked down. I haven't said yes. He nodded. I know, but if you do, you won't be alone in it. That afternoon, she walked through the house again, not as help, but as a guest. Or perhaps something more complicated. She passed the grand piano in the music room, remembered dusting each ivory key with a Q-tip. She paused at the study door, remembered never being allowed to clean inside unless the master was away. She found the old laundry room. The door creaked open. Inside, in the corner, her old blanket was folded carefully on top of a box labeled G. Monroe. She opened the box. Inside, a photo of her mother, framed. A pair of worn gloves. A small notebook with budgeting notes. And the original hospital invoice, now marked in bold red, paid in full. She pressed her hand to the photo. Her mother's eyes smiled up at her. Quiet, brave, unseen. Just like she had been. Until now. That night, Grace sat in the sunroom again. The fire burned low. The quilt was draped over her knees. The folder sat in her lap, finally opened. Director of People First. Salary, benefits. Full autonomy over internal wellness and employee equity programs. A handwritten note inside. You've seen this house more clearly than I ever have. Help me change it. From the inside. E.C. She traced her fingers over the ink. She didn't smile, but she didn't close the folder either. At midnight, Ethan walked past the sunroom. He saw the light still on. Knocked once. I won't push, he said softly. But what are you thinking? Grace looked up, her gaze steady. I'm thinking maybe some houses are worth reopening. She paused. But only if we stop pretending they were ever whole. He nodded slowly. I can work with that, he said. The plaque on the door was temporary, taped hastily above the brass nameplate from the previous occupant. But it was there. Director of People First. Grace Monroe. Grace stood before it, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper like it might disappear. She hadn't yet decided how she felt about it, whether it was a promise or a trap. But she had walked through the front doors of Caldwell Holdings that morning with her shoulders square and her name written in full on the sign-in sheet. No back entrance, no badge borrowed from security, no uniform. She wore a simple slate blouse, navy slacks, and a long wool coat. Nothing extravagant. But to her, it felt like armor. As she stepped into her new office, the city unfolded in glass before her. The entire east side of the 17th floor looked out over Lake Michigan, now frozen in streaks of white and pale silver. A few staffers glanced her way from behind cubicle walls, unsure whether to wave or keep walking. She was a new presence, and an old one. Inside the room, everything was pristine. Minimalist desk, clean notepad, an untouched pen set. On the windowsill sat a small vase of dried lavender, just like the sunroom. She smiled faintly, then turned as a knock came at the door. Ethan stood there, tieless again, sleeves rolled as if trying to look less like a CEO and more like someone reachable. I wanted to see if you made it in okay, he said. She gestured around. No protests yet. Give it time, he quipped, stepping inside. He placed a file on her desk. Current employee wellness reports. We have insurance, basic HR services, PTO, but nothing substantial. No mentorship, no mental health infrastructure, no grievance pathways that don't end in silence. Grace flipped through the pages. Numbers, absentee rates, generic charts. This doesn't say anything about who's tired, who's scared, who's invisible. No, he admitted. That's what I need you for. She looked up. You want me to fix the heart of the company? He nodded slowly. Or help us find one. By 11 a.m., Grace was already walking the lower levels of the building, where elevators opened into mop closets and storage corridors. She bypassed HR. She bypassed the glass-walled innovation lab. She headed straight for custodial services. The break room was cramped. Metal chairs, a microwave that sparked when used too long, a vending machine with 3 blinking lights, and a sign that said, "Out of order since 2022. 3 staff members sat at a small table, eating lunch from Tupperware containers. They looked up in confusion as she entered. One woman squinted through her glasses. Maya? Grace shook her head gently. Grace. A beat of silence. You look different, the woman said, still squinting. Grace smiled, tucking her hands in her pockets. Still the same, just warmer. The room broke into laughter, tentative but genuine. They offered her a seat. She sat. They talked for nearly an hour, about long shifts, rotating managers, the pain of being seen only when something went wrong. HR knows our names when something breaks, said a janitor named Edgar, never when it works. One cleaner, Marlene, showed Grace a knee brace she wore under her uniform. Been here 10 years, she said. No sick days. Afraid if I take one, they'll replace me with someone 20. Grace took notes, not on a laptop, but on paper. Ink and honesty. She didn't make promises. She listened. Later that day, she met with Ethan again, this time in his office, a space that looked more like a bank vault than a workspace. Leather chairs, walls lined with awards. A digital screen flickered with stock updates in one corner. She placed her notepad on his desk. I spoke with your cleaners today, she said. 3 of them have worked here longer than your entire executive team combined. One has nerve damage. Another cleans 2 floors with a torn meniscus. Ethan leaned back. They've never filed complaints. They're afraid to. He said nothing. Grace tapped the file. This isn't just about HR. This is about culture. We talk about innovation, expansion, market growth, but we don't ask who's holding the mop while we rise. He nodded slowly. So what do you need? 3 things, she said, counting them off on her fingers. 1. Visible support. When I shake the tree, I need the root system to hold. That means you. Not just behind closed doors. In front. Done. 2. Access to audits. Real data. Departmental rosters. Grievance histories. No redactions. You'll have it. 3. She paused, then looked him dead in the eye. Let me lead this my way. He smiled faintly. That one was always assumed. By Friday, Grace had already visited 3 departments: custodial, kitchen services, and mailroom logistics. She didn't announce herself. She just showed up. She watched how managers spoke to their staff. Who got eye contact? Who got ignored? She asked about family, about after-work commutes, about the small cracks no one ever filled. And people responded. Cautiously at first, then honestly. By the end of the week, her notepad was full, and her heart was heavier than it had been in years. That night, back in the sunroom, she found Ethan waiting by the fireplace with a tray of tea. "Long day?" he asked. "Long decade," she replied. He chuckled, setting down the tray. "You're good at this." "I'm not trying to be good," she said. "I'm trying to tell the truth." They sat by the fire, silence warming around them. Grace stared into the flames. "You ever think this place can actually change?" Ethan thought for a moment. "I think change starts small, but it ripples." She nodded slowly. "Then let's make ripples." Hook carried from Chapter 1. He fired her for being 5 minutes late. Weeks later, he found her freezing on a park bench, clutching a hospital bill. What happened next changed his company and his soul forever. The first time Grace noticed the door, it was purely by accident. She had been heading toward the freight elevators on lower level 2 of Caldwell Holdings, the oldest part of the building, where ventilation echoed and walls still bore traces of the 1980s. Down here, there were no polished wood finishes or startup-style meeting pods, just pipes, cracked tiles, and the low hum of a forgotten world. A voice had drawn her, a soft, muffled giggle. And then silence. She turned the corner and saw it. A door. Half hidden beneath the main stairwell. No label, no keypad. Just old brass and chipped paint. She stared at it. For a company that prided itself on transparency, this felt like a sealed secret. Grace reached for the knob. It turned. Inside was a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. Dimly lit by a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, the space was stacked with broken chairs, boxes of outdated employee manuals, and a tiny table with 2 small chairs and 1 crayon drawing tacked to the wall, a child's messy scribble of a sun, a house, and a figure standing tall beside a smaller one. Underneath, in jagged block letters, "Mom works here." Grace's throat tightened. There was something about the air in the room. Not dust, not neglect, something heavier. The kind of silence left behind by retreat. She stepped back out, pulling the door gently closed behind her. That evening, Grace brought the drawing up to Ethan's office. She placed it on his desk without a word. He studied it, brows furrowed. "What is this?" "A forgotten room," she said quietly. "Somewhere a child once waited, probably while her mother cleaned this building at night." He blinked. "We don't allow—" "No," Grace cut in. "You don't know. There's a difference." He looked at her then, not defensive, but curious. She sat down. "I've talked to the overnight staff. Some are single parents. One woman said she used to bring her daughter when childcare fell through. Said she'd let her nap under the desk until the floor manager threatened to fire her." Ethan was silent. "Did she file a complaint?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "She did," Grace replied. "HR marked it resolved. But she was reassigned to an earlier shift and lost half her pay." He looked down at the crayon drawing again. "We've built something that looks clean from the top floors but leaks underneath." Grace nodded. "It's time we fix the pipes." By Friday morning, Grace had written a formal proposal, the Caldwell Children's Room Initiative. A designated licensed space inside the building where employees with emergencies or last-minute childcare gaps could safely bring their children for supervised care during shifts. No judgment, no risk of losing hours, just one room with dignity, she explained at the board meeting. The reaction was mixed. Some of the executives smiled politely. One older board member cleared his throat. "We're not a daycare. We're not a machine either," Grace said calmly. "We're a company made of people. People who love, grieve, and raise the next generation." Another exec raised her brow. "How much would it cost?" Ethan leaned forward. "Less than one executive bonus," he said coolly. The room went quiet. "I'll fund it myself if I have to," Ethan added. The project moved faster than anyone expected. Within a month, a former conference room on the mezzanine level was transformed. Soft rugs, bookshelves, tiny desks, a full-time licensed caregiver named Carla, who had previously worked in early childhood education but left due to low pay. Grace had found her resume buried in a box labeled unqualified, no degree. "Sometimes," she said to Ethan, "people with the most heart have the fewest papers." He didn't argue. He had started listening more and talking less. The room opened quietly on a Thursday morning. There were no ribbon cuttings, no press releases, just a handwritten sign on the glass door that read, "Welcome to the Bright Room, for little feet and big hopes." By noon, 2 children were already inside. One was coloring a lion. The other was fast asleep on a beanbag chair, his mother, Rosa, a food services worker, watching from the hallway, eyes shining. Grace stood beside her. "I never thought a place like this would care," Rosa whispered. Grace smiled softly. "It didn't, until we made it." That night, Grace walked back down to the old hidden room below the stairs. She opened the door once more. The broken chairs were gone. The boxes had been cleared, but the wall was still there. Bare now, except for one thing. Grace stepped forward and pinned something new beneath the dangling bulb. A photo. The Bright Room. 3 children laughing, hands covered in paint. And beneath it, in her own handwriting, "We remember where we started, and we make room for who we're becoming." She stepped back, hand over her heart. The air didn't feel heavy anymore. The first thing Grace Monroe did on Monday morning wasn't open an email or check her calendar. She walked straight into the basement custodial lounge of Caldwell Holdings. The air was stale with the scent of bleach and tired years. Plastic chairs scraped against the linoleum floor as startled janitors looked up. For a moment, no one spoke. Then an old man with trembling hands slowly stood. "Ma'am," he said, his voice more air than tone. "Are we in trouble?" Grace smiled, soft but certain. "No, Mr. Thompson, but we're going to start talking." A pause. A mop clattered to the floor. And then, "You remembered my name." That moment spread like warmth into a cold room. It was the first time in 15 years anyone from upstairs had spoken to Harold Thompson as if he mattered. By midweek, Word had rippled through the building. The new director of cultural affairs wasn't holding meetings in glass rooms, but in break rooms. She listened with her whole body, eyes locked, shoulders leaned in, no clock watching, and more startling still, she asked questions, real ones. What does dignity look like in your job? When did you last feel proud? What's one thing we pretend to care about but don't? The answers came hesitantly at first, then like a river bursting its dam. Marisol, a cafeteria worker, spoke of racial bias in uniform inspections. Kenny, an HVAC tech, revealed that requests for proper gloves were often denied. An intern named Clara shared that her supervisor referred to lower floor workers as lower-class assets. Grace wrote everything down, not in a laptop, but by hand, in a worn leather notebook. It was Charles Prescott who first called her the mirror. "You're not fixing us," he said one night in the rooftop garden. "You're just holding up a mirror, and for once, we can't look away." He handed her a steaming mug of herbal tea. She looked down at the skyline of Chicago, flickering beneath a soft fog. Then she said quietly, "Mirrors don't lie, but they don't scream either." Prescott nodded. Truth rarely does. On Friday, the usually silent floor near the custodial lockers was alive. Someone had brought donuts. Laughter trickled down the hallway. Grace sat on a folding chair, listening to a janitor named Elsie tell a story about nearly vacuuming up an executive's silk tie in 2009. It wasn't a strategic initiative. It wasn't a policy shift. It was a room full of people remembering they were human. And for the first time in years, the building echoed with laughter that wasn't muffled by power. That evening, Ethan Caldwell watched the security feed in silence. He saw Grace in the break room, laughing with staff, her body relaxed, a hand to her heart. "She doesn't need a podium," he muttered. Renee Colton stood beside him, arms crossed. "No," she agreed. "She is one." But beneath the joy, a quiet current stirred. In one of her handwritten notes, Grace had circled 3 names. All were longtime employees who had quietly vanished over the years without public notice. 2 had raised complaints about harassment. 1 had emailed HR about financial discrepancies. None had received exit interviews. Grace closed her notebook. "It's time," she whispered. "We stop sweeping truth under carpets." Just outside the break room, a camera blinked red. Someone was watching, and they didn't like mirrors. The boardroom was unusually full that morning. The glass walls of Caldwell Holdings' top floor gleamed under the Chicago sun, but the mood inside was cold, clipped, and calculated. 12 executives sat stiffly around the table, their tablets glowing with files already decided. Grace Monroe stood alone at the far end, her leather notebook in hand. Charles Prescott's voice broke the silence. "Before we begin, I want the minutes to reflect. This meeting was called without consulting the Director of Cultural Affairs." A woman in a beige suit gave him a cool smile. "Because, Charles, it concerns her." Grace lifted her chin. "I'm right here. Let's not whisper." A few exchanged glances. Then the head of compliance, Mr. Loring, tapped his screen. The room dimmed. A slideshow began. Out-of-context photos, lines from Grace's private interviews with staff, cherry-picked phrases written in her notebook. "There's a pattern of divisive behavior," Loring began. "Breach of protocol, emotional influence over essential staff." Another board member added, The janitorial wing now refers to her as the mirror. That is not in her job description. A hand raised. A vote called. 6 hands in favor of immediate dismissal. 3 abstained. 2 against, Prescott, and a silent Renee Colton. Grace didn't flinch. She placed her notebook on the table and opened it. "Do you know what these are?" she asked, flipping through pages. "Not complaints, not rebellion. These are stories. Wounds this building ignored. I held the mirror because no one else would." Loring sneered. "This is a corporation, not group therapy." That's when Charles spoke. "And yet our culture is bleeding. If we remove truth, we remove our soul." He stood. "This building has survived lawsuits, walkouts, scandals, but I promise you it won't survive another decade if it silences the only voice that listens." The room stilled. Someone coughed. The vote paused. Just then, a folder slid quietly across the polished table. Everyone turned. It had come from Renee. "What is this?" Loring asked. "Receipts," she said, "signed off the book's bonuses, from the discretionary fund." More silence. Then pages turned, names read aloud, including Loring's own. Charles whistled low. "I see now why truth bothers you." A phone buzzed. Prescott checked it. A message from an encrypted source. "See attached. Employment clauses buried in 2009 amendments allow silent terminations. Documented." Prescott passed the phone to Grace. Her hand tightened. "Jeremiah," she whispered. "Who?" Charles asked. "A man who disappeared so his daughter could graduate. He's speaking now." Grace looked back at the room, eyes fierce. "You want silence?" she asked. "Fine. But I will not be your broom." She walked out, head high. Charles and Renee followed. Behind them, the carpet looked freshly vacuumed. But beneath it, something had started to breathe. The maintenance elevator of Caldwell Holdings creaked to a stop between floors 14 and 15. It wasn't on any employee map. Only those who'd worked in the building long enough remembered it. Grace Monroe stepped inside with Charles Prescott and Renee Colton beside her. "I'm telling you, this is madness," Charles muttered. "No cameras, no sensors. This whole shaft is dead space." Renee smiled. "Exactly why he chose it." The elevator opened into a narrow corridor. At the end, a rusted door with peeling paint and a number faded almost to nothing. Room B112. Grace knocked once. Silence. Then the door creaked open. Inside stood a man in his late 60s wearing an old janitor's uniform. His back was slightly hunched, but his eyes were sharp. And despite the age in his joints, his voice carried weight. "Grace Monroe," he said. "You finally came." "Booker," she whispered. He gestured them inside. The room was small, part archive, part sanctuary. Old files stacked in boxes, a clock that hadn't ticked in years, and on the far table, a leather-bound notebook identical to the one Grace carried. "I used to clean boardrooms," Booker said. "Heard things I wasn't supposed to. Saw things buried faster than truth." He handed her the notebook. 15 years, he said. Every silent firing, every closed-door bonus. I wrote them down. Grace flipped through the pages. Names, dates, codes, signatures. Her hands trembled. "You knew they'd come after me," she said. Booker nodded. "They always do when someone starts listening." He looked at Charles. "You voted against her firing?" Charles gave a dry laugh. "I didn't do it for her. I did it because I'm tired of watching this company eat its own." Booker turned to Renee. "And you?" I believe in the legacy I want my niece to inherit, she replied. Booker smiled faintly. She's lucky. Mine doesn't talk to me anymore, he said. I disappeared so she could go to college. They made me sign an NDA with her tuition attached. Grace's voice caught. You gave up your voice to give her a future. She doesn't know, he said quietly. She thinks I quit. There was a moment of silence so deep, even the dust seemed to hold its breath. Then Grace closed the notebook and stood. Mr. Booker, she said, your voice is coming back. That afternoon, a secure file made its way to Grace's private inbox. It was from Jeremiah Kent, former VP of Risk and Audit, who had retired early after a nervous breakdown. The file was encrypted. When she opened it, her breath caught. Emails, memos, a full list of HR complaints scrubbed from the system, including those from the 3 vanished employees Grace had discovered, and a final document labeled Plan Delphi, Full Internal Audit Wipe, scheduled Q3. Dear God, Renee whispered. They're not just hiding history, they're erasing it. Grace looked up. Not if we move first. That night, in the building's deserted printing room, Grace, Charles, Renee, and Booker stood around an old blueprint of the company's server layout. There's a backup node they don't know I mapped, Booker said. Under the training floor. If we plant a trace there, we can intercept every deletion attempt. Charles stared at him. How do you even know that? Booker smirked. They should have never underestimated janitors. Grace smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. We're not just fighting to save a company, she said. We're fighting to remember who we are. Booker placed a hand on her shoulder. Then let's remind them. Outside, the lights of Chicago blinked beneath a rising storm. And underground, truth stirred again. The underground level of Caldwell Holdings wasn't on the official floor plan anymore. It hadn't been since 2006, when the board had deemed it unnecessary to keep a training center for janitorial staff. But the keys still existed, and Booker still had one. Grace followed Booker, Charles, and Renee down a narrow stairwell lit only by motion sensors. The deeper they went, the more the air changed. Cool, stale, heavy with forgotten things. At the bottom, Booker pushed open a steel door. Beyond it, a small server room hummed in defiance of time. This is the ghost, Booker said. They think it was decommissioned, but I always knew it was still breathing. Rows of server racks blinked softly. An old wall calendar still hung near the breaker panel, frozen on October 2011. Renee set up a laptop and connected it to the core node. She began scanning. What are we looking for exactly? Charles asked. Proof, Renee replied, that they're about to delete everything. Payroll trails, audit histories, complaint archives. Plan Delphi isn't just about hiding corruption. It's about rewriting the company's memory. Grace's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Then let's make sure it remembers. Minutes turned into hours. Booker stood guard by the stairwell, listening for any motion above. Renee uncovered a queue of scheduled deletions, set to trigger at midnight Friday. It's all here, she whispered. They were going to wipe 10 years of internal data. No recovery protocol, just gone. Charles paced. If we leak this, it'll be war. It already is, Grace said. They declared it the day they tried to erase people. Just then Renee froze. A file had pinged active. Someone else is in the system, she murmured. On screen, a new user had logged into the server from upstairs. Their access was clean, elevated, and hidden behind a PR firm's VPN. They're watching us, Renee said. And they know we're here. Grace didn't blink. Then let them see. Upload everything to a public time-stamped vault and call the press. Charles raised a brow. All of it? Every dirty ledger, every silenced complaint, every clause that let them vanish people. Booker nodded. You burn the rot by dragging it into the light. Renee encrypted the files and sent them to a national newsroom. Then she hit upload to a public archive. Within minutes, a secure channel from Jeremiah Kent lit up. His face appeared, older, paler, but eyes sharp. They tried to buy my silence, he said. So I became the echo. You did good, Grace, but now you need to prepare. For what? She asked. He didn't smile. For the building to shake. The screen went black. Upstairs, phones began ringing, emails pinged, and the truth, no longer beneath the carpet, was heading for the light. The sun rose over Chicago, painting the skyline with amber light. For the first time in weeks, Grace Monroe wasn't waking up dreading the day. She stood at her window, overlooking a city that no longer felt like a cage. Today was the press conference. Today, the truth would breathe freely. In the marble lobby of Caldwell Holdings, cameras flashed, microphones buzzed, and reporters lined the walls like nervous birds. The company's name had trended for 48 hours straight. Whistleblower documents, hidden payrolls, illegal terminations, it had all been released. The building wasn't just shaking, it was cracking open. Grace stepped onto the podium, flanked by Charles Prescott, Renee Colton, and Booker. No teleprompter, just her notebook. Good morning, she began. Her voice echoed against stone and silence. I used to clean these floors, not in metaphor, literally. I scrubbed coffee spills with bleach and silence. I watched people walk by like I was invisible. Cameras clicked, pens froze midair. But even invisible people leave footprints, and eventually the dust talks back. She opened her notebook, not to read, but to show them. Pages filled with handwritten accounts. Laughter. Pain. Names. These stories were never meant to be read, she said, holding them high. They were meant to be heard. She turned to the crowd. This isn't about revenge. This is about memory. About what a company becomes when it forgets the hands that built it. The room was still. And then, a rustle. From the back of the room, a little girl no older than 7 walked up, her blonde curls bouncing with every step. She held a single wildflower in her hand. The audience parted like water. The girl stopped at Grace's feet and looked up. My mom used to clean here too, she whispered. She said you're the bravest lady in the world. Grace knelt. Her eyes stung. Your mom is right, she said. And so are you. She took the flower. That afternoon, Caldwell Holdings announced the creation of the Legacy of Grace Scholarship Fund for children of service workers pursuing education. Booker was reinstated with full pension. Renee was made head of internal ethics. And Charles? He was voted in as the new CEO by a board now terrified of silence. As for Grace Monroe, she did something quieter. She bought back the cleaning contract for Caldwell, rehired every laid-off worker, built a break room with real windows and real couches, and on the lobby wall, she mounted a plaque. This building no longer echoes with silence. It echoes with truth. Underneath it, she placed the flower. The fire had passed, but something had bloomed in its place.